Okay. Greetings, brothers and sisters. So, I've been waiting to do this for a while now. There are these prophecies from Whispers of the Brighter World, and there is a section which is a part of it that's called prophecy. I'll talk about that later. But I'm going to read them. But first, I want to explain what Whispers of the Brighter World messages are, give a sort of a history of it, and that is, like there's an hour-long video or whatever it was, voiceover I did some weeks ago, which I'm going to keep and just in case I have to talk about this again somewhere. And it's an explanation of sort of the history of the Whispers messages. And I'm going to listen to that again because I don't know what's in there. And just if there's anything else I need to add to it, I'll add to it. And then I'm going to start reading the prophecies. Today is Tuesday, December 31st. So I have those things to do here. And let's get into the introduction here. Okay, so unfortunately, that Whispers introduction, I don't like it. It's not good for this particular video. It was part of a Journey series. This is going to be also a Journey series video. I think it's the 172nd or 73rd Journey series video. This is 172. And so I'm going to, make this a separate Journey series video that'll be up on for members, but also this will be as the prophecies part for regular viewers. The history of the Whisperer messages are as follows. So, in like 2003 or 2004, Master Chargy, the third master of the system, said he had a special book that he was releasing, and people who wanted it had to pre-order it. He didn't say what it was about. Some people do because they had worked on it, but I didn't know. And he said it was going to be $250. Now, that was extraordinarily expensive for a Sagemark book. They had these really nicely printed, beautifully bound books that were called Letters of the Master, which were 2 volumes together. And they were, in like a set, and they were $50. And the rest of the books were at most $15. These were hardcover books, but oftentimes they were $10 or less. Printed in India to be as cheap as possible. And people would bring these books back. Like if you went to India and visited the mission, they would ask you to take a box of books back on the plane with you, right? Because shipping is so expensive from India to America. And then you'd give the books to whoever and they would distribute them, right? So they tried to keep the costs down. They made very little profit off the books because there was lots of books that never were, you never bought. They had inventory, right? They had to print out so many books. Of course, there wasn't the print on demand that Amazon and these other, various, Amazon's the big one that you can use, which I use for my books, right? The 2 books that I've written. But that's more expensive because they got to print it and ship it and these things. Whereas if you print a lot of books out, you get a, better deal. So the idea had always been to keep the cost of the books down. So this was a lot of money for a book that nobody knew what it was about. But I felt like energy around it initially, right? I was like pretty psyched about it. And so we received the book in 2005. And for me personally, there's so many things in there. But what it was channeled messages. And, we started to learn details about it over the next couple of books. Like we knew that there was a medium and that she was French. And then we started getting details about this woman who was a very private person. She referred to herself as a pencil, but she was one of the best channelers that had ever existed. She, in a past life, she was this Sister Teresa of Avila, which she, talked about having a connection to. And she was also this woman in England, Sister Margaret Noble, that had a different name, who worked with and for Swami Vivekananda. Something like Sister Nadivita. But anyways, this particular person had a long history of being a medium and channeling in previous existences and had past lives with these beings called the divine hierarchy, the people, these disembodied souls that are here for the upliftment of humanity and to do God's work, to make sure that God's work and vision comes to fruition. So her name was Helene Perrault. I don't know how to pronounce her last name accurately. She's a French woman who was born into wealth, and she was riding a horse when she was a kid, fell off the horse, hurt her back, and a doctor she would later describe as a butcher would mess up her back forever, and she was in constant pain for the rest of her life, and basically a shut-in. She couldn't go out and be in the world so much. She had to be in her apartment. She was somebody who was disabled in some way physically. She was born in 1928. I just looked at it, and that would make her. She was 90 when she died, and she was in her 60s, late 50s, 60s when she started receiving these messages. And she thought she was crazy. She had been doing the meditation, Sajmarg meditation, and all of a sudden Babaji started to talk to her. I don't believe she knew Babaji in her, when he was alive. And I don't know if she had ever met Charji, again, someone who couldn't travel. And she started to receive these messages, and she was very doubtful about them and remained doubtful about them her whole life. Like she had lacked confidence, and, it's an abstract thing. Even though she was a really great medium, these messages, these Whisper to Bright World messages, there's like 20,000 of them. And Babaji has said this is the largest assortment of these types of messages that have ever been given. And one day somebody showed up at her door. She started receiving messages in the early 90s, but they were infrequent. And some woman showed up in the door and said, Babaji sent me to tell you that the messages are real. So some other woman got a message from Babaji, a medium, and she went and told this woman, yes, these are real messages. And so she started to receive these messages, and then was told to give them to other French Abhyasis, who then eventually made them available to Charji, translating them to English. And Charji at first was not happy with it because he was expecting to receive these messages himself from Babaji. So when he was around Babaji, and he describes this, which I've read the introduction already in this other voiceover, and I'll take that out of that one and put it here so I don't have to do it again. But he wrote this excellent introduction, which he had to basically sort of sell people on this idea that this French woman was receiving these messages from Babaji. And he himself was not psyched about it because Babaji had channeled all these various higher developed souls, particularly Lalaji, and was very adept at it. Like Babaji would be sitting there, he'd have his hookah, and he smoked this hookah with jaggery, tobacco, and charcoal. And he, it was like his one main thing. Like he didn't really eat that much. He had an ulcer, and he was very frail. He didn't, it wasn't of the kind. It was like he was detached from the world so much. He wasn't big on food, but he, smoked this hookah with a great deal of enjoyment. And he would sit around with these people, the Abhyasis, and he'd read their condition, and he would tell them stories. And every once in a while, he would just look off into the distance like he was listening to something, even though no one was talking. And there were times he was giving sittings, and he would be sitting in a chair, and then he'd get off the chair and flop down on the ground. And then after the sitting, he said Lalaji came to do the rest of the sitting, his spiritual master. But in his diary, he intercommuned with all these various saints and souls, and particularly his master, Lalaji. And he had all these various interactions with him. And all the things that he did, his actions as creating like an organization and writing books, making an emblem, naming the thing, was all channeled. He was, told what to do by these higher souls, and he would do it. Right? It wasn't of his own volition. It was stuff that he was ordered through this process. Right? And so Charaji thought that would happen to him. Like Babaji had 13 years between the time that Lalaji, his spiritual master, the first master of the system, died, and the time that he was announced that he was his representative. He was going to continue Lalaji's work. So for 13 years, he intercommuned with Lalaji, and he was brought through these various stages and these spiritual points and things. And so at some point, Babaji told Charji he had opened up the point where Charji would be able to intercommune like Babaji did. And when Babaji died, he was like, where are you? Like, why aren't you talking to me, right? And so it was a kind of and Charji went through hell. Like, people tried to kill him, and people turned on him. 90% of the people in the mission rejected him, and he just went through this difficult time, lawsuits. Babaji's kids tried to steal the properties that belonged to this organization. They tried to, inherit these properties when they were properties that were bought by collective money. Like people donated money and bought these properties, and they weren't Babaji's possessions. They were part of an organization, but his kids wanted to take these properties, particularly this ashram, the one lone ashram that was built in Shah Jahanpur. And so it's an absolute mess. And Charji felt like he was all alone. He later would publish his diaries and some of the letters he wrote to people. But he felt kind of like Babaji just left him here with a big mess and just didn't, wasn't intercommuning with him. So years later, when this French woman shows up saying she's channeling Babaji, Charji wasn't psyched. But he ended up valuing her and her work as time went on. When he saw the validity of the messages, he could hear Babaji's voice in the messages, and there were things that just convinced him that this was the real deal. Even though the woman herself doubted, like even towards the end of her life, she lived to 2018, so she lived 90 years. She was born in 1928. And, she put out 30 years of messages. Like she started to receive these messages in her 60s. So 6 years of messages. And one more thing about the channeling thing. And then I want to go to Charji's introduction to the book. So in the messages, Babaji said that almost everything that's done is done by channeling. Swami Vivekananda and Tesla were friends. And Tesla, reported, basically intercommuning with higher souls or, technical souls or whatever. And he got his inventions through that process. Any great inventor is getting information from above. Like oftentimes, thoughts that you have aren't your own thoughts. Like sometimes you could pick up other people's thoughts even though you're not aware of them. Souls can come in and give you information or make you feel something. Like it's just, there's no boundaries for these disembodied souls. And some of them are a lower nature, what people would consider demons. Some of them are just, like you, and then there's going to be higher developed souls. And so it's connecting to the higher developed ones that's important. But everybody connects with these beings, with etheric life, soul life, even other people's souls on the planet. When you go to sleep, a loved one, that's maybe miles away, but you intercommune in some way through your dreams or something, or you feel something like a parent. All of a sudden, a child comes to their mind, and they call the child, and they just had an accident, or they're going through something, right? They're in crisis. I mean, this happens all the time. And what Babaji had said is pretty much everything that's creative in the human process is given through this channeling or some intercommuning type of situation. There's a great TED Talk, if it still exists, by the woman Elizabeth, I don't know her last name, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And she talks about this very process. She talks about how there was this idea of a genius, and a genius was a disembodied soul. If you had a genius, if you connected some disembodied soul that was of a higher nature, it would give you some of this information and some of these things. But people who write great stories and come up with great stories and great creative works and inventions and art, they can feel something like a vision that comes to them, and that's this intercommuning process, which I'm very personally well aware of. And we all have different ways of receiving. Charji certainly was communicating with Babaji, but he wasn't having these conversations like Babaji had. And so there's certain people who are mediums, and it takes a lot of energy. This is all this woman did. And if Charji had to produce 20,000 messages, he couldn't do all the work he's doing. Because it's physically draining to intercommune with a higher developed being, because you have to resonate on their level. And you have a mundane physical body, gross physical body. And so it's draining on the physical body to rise up to that level where you can intercommune with these souls. But it's something that in the future, everyone's going to be able to do in one way or another. And that's going to make things a lot easier, because you'll be able to talk to divinity, divine souls, to guide you through your life. So this will be transformative in the human process. And so Charji knew that there would be pushback to this book. And so he had to explain to people. There's one more thing I want to say about the channeling, and then we'll get to the Charji thing. Well, let's do the Charji thing, and I'll come back to that. And so this is Charji's introduction, because he knew there was going to be pushback. Here it is. Okay, so this is called An Invitation, and Charji wrote this at the beginning of the book. There are many different forms of communication at various levels of evolution. Let me make this bigger here. Make it easier for me to read. Many levels of evolution of the average human is yet not aware of. The average human is yet only aware of a few. The usual modes of communication with all the familiar, with all the all which are all familiar, whatever their level of education or evolution, are speech, smell, sight, or vision, and touch. These employ our sensory apparatus with which we were born and our gross physical levels of communication. They are used at all levels of existence in the world of insects, animals, birds, humans, the sense of smell playing a large part at the subhuman level. The native tribes of North America used to use smoke signals. In medieval times, beacons of fire were lit on hilltops to muster the troops, or signals of an emergency, etc. The ringing of the bells in churches to announce times of prayer, marriage, death, and emergencies requiring the population to come in for safety is well known. The call to the devout for prayer in the Islamic religion was the muezzin's loud call, heard over long distances, repeated at least 5 times a day. And there is the not unfamiliar ululation of women. That's what he means. Of women in Arab countries used to signify happiness or sorrow or grief of the whole tribe. Speech at a distance, even distances crossing entire countries and encompassing the globe, has been made possible by technological advancements, giving human beings the facility of verbal communicating with other people across vast distances separating them. As for seeing, the unaided human eye can see at considerable distance, but here again, optical instruments that enhance vision, such as telescope and microscope, permit us to see objects in the macro universe as well as the micro universe. Although within limits, human technology makes it possible to see what is happening halfway around the globe or even on distant planets by electronic transmission images that are received by the viewer on subtle instruments such as the television, consoles, and computer monitors, which convert the electronic patterns into viewable pictures. All these involved vibrations of energy. The average individual today is as familiar with such evolved means of communication as he is with the bullock cart, the train, the airplane flying in the sky, and the huge seafaring vessels floating serenely on the oceans of the world, though few are aware of how massive ship floats on water or a huge plane flies in the sky. Modern life has taught us how to use marvelous inventions or advanced technological age without the need to understand how they work. We accept them because in one way or another they make life easier to live, make communication instantly possible, and add comfort to the home. A mere television set brings select events from anywhere in the world, or even the cosmos, right into our home as we watch from the comfort of our armchairs while munching on a sandwich. This is a wonderful introduction here. I haven't read this in some time. The energy used in electromagnetic energy, light is the supreme form of this energy, for it can speed its way across the universe with a velocity of 300,000 kilomiles per second. Kilometers. Kilometers. Nevertheless, it takes time, and so when we see a distant star, what we see is only the light that emanated from the star in some distant past, 4.33 years in the case of the star nearest to our Earth. If the star had died before the light had reached us, we would have absolutely no knowledge of its death until its dying burst of energy reaches us. So what do we see? So what do we really see? And yet we say that we are seeing, that seeing is believing. Radar was discovered after studying the way bats communicate, whales, and other creatures. I'm going to make this bigger again here. My sight's a little bit blurry today, which sucks. This just happened someday. Whales and other aquatic forms of life communicate using sound, which is transmitted through the water. Sound needs a physical medium through which it can be transmitted, and therefore cannot be transmitted through a vacuum. Its waves travels very slowly when compared to the velocity of light. When there is a flash of lightning, we see the illumination first, and only many moments later, depending on the distance, hear the sound that we call thunder. The people of pre-science times have no knowledge of that light and sound both reflected the same phenomenon. Heat, too, is a manifestation of the energy vibrating in a different level. It has been used by the armed forces and guided weapon systems of mass destruction, and can be said to be yet another form of communication, but with a limited application. We can see how circumscribed knowledge can be when we depend only on the information available to us through the medium of our five senses. What we have to appreciate in these manifestations of energy required naturally developed organs of perception to receive those vibrations, to translate them into what we see as light, hear as sound, and feel as heat. Schopenhauer, the great German philosopher, has said when a giant oak tree crashes down in the forest, there will be no sound if there are no ears to hear it, but only vibrations. In essence, therefore, we are limited to receive substantial narrow ranges of energy for which nature has given us the necessary instrumentation. The truly vast ranges of energy patterns are sadly beyond human perception. What of the ability to transmit by thought alone? Unfortunately, human beings are as yet unwilling to accept that we can communicate with each other without mechanical or electronic means being used. It has been accepted that thought can go from its source to its destination, even if it has to travel across the whole universe instantly. The Russian scientists of the former USSR reported to have conducted very secret research into the possibility of transmitting orders to the orbital spacecraft as well as to the manned space flights by thought and power alone, since traditional media of communication needed time for orders to reach the targeted recipient. In situations involving distances measurable in parsecs through power alone could ensure immediate response to orders. This shows that many, including science, did believe in the possibility of sending thought messages across immensities of space. What degree of success those scientists achieved, if any, is sadly not known. In the lives of the evolved saints, however, such transmission of thought seems to have been possible, if not common. My revered master, my spiritual guide, Ramchandraji Maharaj Babaji, used thought communication with his master Lalaji. I have seen him suddenly putting on his cap and attentively listening with his head bowed, nodding his head, and making murmuring noise, Han, Han, meaning yes, yes in Hindi. And then, if he was inclined, laying us into the content of the message that he had just received from his master. This has happened quite frequently, even when he was strolling around the house, when he would come to a sudden stop and receive a message, when he wanted to communicate with his master in general, sat silently in a very relaxed manner, but his attention centered somewhere far beyond our human approach, and all of us knew that such occasions were to be respected silently with humility until my master reverted to his normal state. I once asked him whether he heard the Grand Master as Lalaji was addressed, and Bobby said that there was no hearing, as we understand it, involved. He said that it was really the heart that received the messages from above, as he put it. But our familiarity with the sensory inputs could beguile us into thinking that the message was heard with the ears. There's been 2 or 3 occasions where my master gave me a sitting with a specific purpose, and he appeared to be unable to proceed. Lalaji told him by the means of communication, send him to me. I shall complete the work myself. During the long years of my intimate personal association with Master, such occasions have been too numerous for me to disregard this means of communication, which Babaji called intercommunication. He himself recorded in his personal diary not only person-to-person communication with Lalaji Maharaj, but dialogue in which several high elevated souls have participated, including Buddha, Swami Vivekananda, and Jesus Christ. We must observe some citation when we refer to so-called messages from the spirits. We must observe some caution when we refer to so-called messages from the spirits, dead persons, etc., which fall generally within the domain of spiritism or occultism, and are supposedly received by mediums serving as during seances. This is advisably a great deal of suspicion regarding the class of messages. There is advisably a great deal of suspicion regarding these class of messages. One has to be called in all. One has to be careful in all matters without automatically writing off messages received from the highest liberated personalities, such as Lalaji Maharaj, Babaji Maharaj, and other saints of that caliber referred to above. Ancient civilizations, especially those from Eastern world, have all recorded messages received by spiritually developed individuals who are able to communicate with so-called higher entities using forms of vibration unknown to them and to us. It is a welcome phenomenon that in the past decade or so there has been a considerable body of literature not merely on the possibility of such communication, but recording what authors claim to be as actual communication with God Himself. Was thought power used in such communication? The human recipient generally received it as a thought form, And wonder of wonders, he has also comprehended the message in his own language, though the transmitted message was not couched in any human language. How did the person or spiritual entity at the other end send the message or order? It is perhaps impossible to say how the message was sent. The depth of the communication depended only on the individual's level of spiritual attainment. They were able to receive messages as visible patterns or as sound, and often have been enacted for the understanding whole scenes pertaining to the future, which such seers later communicated to the masses by limited means available to humanity, speech and vision. For merely natural human possibilities to scientific and technological development, means of communication using scientific techniques to the spiritual dimension, is there an acceptable or perceptible development in human abilities? Or is the subject again to be neglected to the realms of doubt, suspicion, often of fear, generated hatred leading to persecution, thus to what has been a final regulation to the limbo of scientific possibilities? Developed souls have enjoyed contact with what has been known as higher worlds through the medium of dreams. In the life of spiritual aspirant, dreams tend to be more and more meaningful as the individual develops, and has quite often formed yet another medium of communication, often a one-way affair, but certainly not limited to that. Having said all this, which is merely elementary sciences which children nowadays learn in school, we have to conclude that deeply entrenched beliefs in what communication means, and even more deeply held prejudice, account for the inability of average human being able to accept the fact of communication with other souls, even when they are still with us in human form. As for communication with disembodied soul, well, that is generally written off as some sort of aberration, and if the concerned person persists in speaking about it, he runs the risk of being institutionalized. I assure you, the reader, that I too have been skeptical about the possibility of communicating with worlds other than our own, but there have been far too many hidden nuances in the messages from my master to permit me to remain a skeptic. I must confess to an occasional doubt even now, but such doubts are fleeting and leave me in peace almost very instant they appear. There is no shame in sincere doubt, which my master said my master should not be called doubt, but as inquiry. But to remain a skeptic and unbeliever even after receiving ample inner verification in the veracity of these messages, that would indeed be shameful and a tragedy. My invitation to the reader is to set aside all preconceived notions and prejudice and read what follows, and then judge with the heart, for the heart is the par excellence and the instrument for verification of the truth, which I have done and have done personally. Everybody has to do this personally. Somebody wrote me a comment, and I haven't, I'll see if I can find that. A medium who is not a professional has passed on these messages to me after my master gave orders that they be available to me. She is a Sister Abhyasi of the Sajmark system of the spiritual practice. I have recorded messages from 4 sources, all of them beloved to me, and all beyond question. The first is my mother Janaki, This is in the first Whispers book. So this introduction is the first Whispers book, and these messages are there from his mom, who passed away in the year 1933, leaving behind 4 children, 3 boys, of whom I am the eldest, and the fourth child, a girl, who followed her mother when she was but 3 years old. His sister died when she was 3. His mom never recovered from childbirth. As I've written elsewhere, I have no knowledge of my mother at all, remembering nothing more than the last heart-rending scene before her mortal remains were taken away for cremation. Nevertheless, she has remained with me as a pervasive reality, often appearing in my dreams somewhat vaguely, and other occasions thoughts about her adding to my sorrow when I was in a mood of despair and loneliness. The second entity that has graced me with the messages of the Grand Master of the spiritual system, held at Sahaj Marg, now spread all over the globe. He is a personality with whom I have no personal relationship, since Lalaji Maharaj, as Mahatma Ramchandraji of Fatehgarh was popularly known, attained Mahasamadhi. He died. Preceding my mother into the brighter world when I was 5 years old, I've been blessed with spiritual experience wherein he graced me with his spiritual presence on several occasions. Babaji would say Lalaji's going to give you a sitting and charge you would get direct work from Lalaji. On a few occasions, I have been blessed with direct sittings, too, from Lalaji Maharaj. The third person to bless with messages is Babaji Maharaj. He's doing this in the order of their passing away. My spiritual master has filled my life with the brim, with his loving presence, his teachings, his divine love, starting with my very first meeting with him in Sahaj Marg way back in 1964. His loving and patient guidance have followed me throughout the 40 years of my sadhana under the Sahaj Marg system, and even today, that same guidance filled with his love and compassion is generously made available to me through these messages. Lalaji Maharaj rediscovered the system of Sahaj Marg of spiritual practice when my master spread it all over the world during the years of 1972 to 1982, when I was closely associated with him in his work carried out throughout the Sri Ramchandra mission. My wife Saloshana, who departed for the brighter world in November 1999, is a fourth giver of the messages, having secured her place in my master's heart in his lifetime, and now seated at his divine feet in the brighter world. I invite the readers of this book to set aside the skepticism, their doubts, perhaps even anger, when confronted by the whispers from the sources not located on earth, but received as messages addressed to me, many to other abhyasis of the mission, and so many of the general relevance not addressed to anyone in particular, but to the whole of humanity. May these messages bring hope to the threatened humanity, threatened with instant extinction by the forces of hatred, willful violence, and religious bigotry. P. Rajagopalachari, Parsatharthi Rajagopalachari. Sadkol, that's the ashram in the Himalayas. Basant Panchami, 13th of February, 2005. So this was Lalaji's birthday. He was in the Himalayan mountains, and he wrote this wonderful introduction. Okay, so I'm glad I didn't have to read that again. That'll save my voice a little bit because I have all these whispers messages to read. So just a few things to address here. So the first one is, I like what he said, and again, I forgot. I just recorded this a couple months ago. But what he said about, if you look at how your ears work, right? And I don't really know, so I know there's an eardrum, it goes down, and you pick up vibrations and things. But our ability to interpret words, like when you talk to dogs, your inflection of your voice is everything. And they maybe kind of learn their names. But their ears, lots of times most animals aren't capable of understanding human language and words. With apes, it's a little bit better, right? And they can learn sign language. But being able to communicate through sound, and we have all this communication through sound. And, starting off with the telegraph and things and all the television and radio and telephones and cell phones, and now we beam stuff up into space, satellite communication, and all these formats, videos, things, ways that we have of leaving information, right? Videos are a form of information. Of course, there's a written word and books and things. And we all accept that those things are real because they are, right? But they're all based in energy. And, what he was saying about light and the speed of light, but the speed of thought in the Sajmark system, we all have this, our thought force is akin to, basically identical to the original thought, which is God that created the universe. God being that original thought, what Babaji called the Great Kashob, this original primary stir that created out of nothingness the external universe and the eternal universe. And that thought process, all of the ideas that we have and the information that flows through us and in us, and our dreams and things that we have, that we go to different levels of consciousness and different brain patterns, right? Thought and love, love, the energy, the love energy, the transmission that's given in the Sajmark system, and love that we feel. And thought are things that are beyond the fourth dimension of time, so there's no time and space to receive them, right? And so, there's thoughts coming to us, but we can't hear them like we hear words. It's not as physical. It's not as, it's not third dimensional. And people who have been able to go through some sort of, usually a personal trauma, like this woman had this physical trauma, but oftentimes people who are mediums, like they lost a child and they so desperately, or they lost a loved one, and they reach up to the heavens to intercommune with that soul, and all of a sudden something opens up for them, and their ability to intercommune and channel is there. But if you can believe in like radio waves, and if you can believe in internet, information coming through energetic, it's beaming around your house, the Wi-Fi, and coming through, whatever portholes or whatever ways that it's making it into your devices, and then making it into your ears and your eyes and things as you watch the videos. Why not believe in some of these other things, right? I know I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything, but it's there. Christians have a problem with channeling, but most of the New Testament was written in a channeled form. Most of the work that's in there, some of it's stories of Jesus' life and conversations his disciples had with him. Most of it's like post his death, Jesus was intercommuning with his disciples. And St. Paul, who never met Jesus in his life, that whole part is him connecting to God, right? And in the Old Testament, you have the burning bush and these other examples of that. And so channeling, you wouldn't even have a religion or a book if there's no channeling, if you're a Christian, right? And so, it's just there. It's a fact in all of our creative material, and people are intercommuning with disembodied souls and connecting to, different levels of higher dimensions and things all the time, and are just not aware of it, and it's very subtle. And it's not something that you can, hang your hat on like a physical thing, but it's there, right? And all these people who receive transmission, my brother, he started doing the Sajmark system, and he went to some preceptor's house, one of the, sort of fear-based people in the system, and she asked him if he was mentally ill, and he says to me, I'm thinking that this woman is telling me that some guy across the ocean of India has reached some high level of spiritual attainment, and energy is passing through him, and then through this woman, and then into his heart, and she's asking me if I'm crazy. And so, the transmission that's given the Sajmark system is very palpable, and people who can feel it, love it. It's amazing. It's divine energy. Not everybody feels it, but people who do, it's amazing. And some of the people who have heard about it through my channel have benefited from the system, or at least they experience the energy coming through me, right? When I make these videos, because we're all conduits who do the system for this higher developed energy, this God's love to pass through us. And yet they struggled with this book, and many of them quit, and there's a whole thing with it, right? And so I don't care about that. But if you believe in the system, you have to believe in all of it. It's like all of a sudden Chargy got duped or something. I mean, this guy called the Dodgy Truther. That was the original voiceover that I did in the video. It's can be heard in the Journey Series 167. But, channeling is part of human life, and people who get it, and people who don't, just like with past lives, it's to your benefit. Like, if it's real, it's to your benefit. If it's truth, then knowing about it is important, and it's going to help you navigate through your existence. And so I'm, again, I'm not here to convince anybody. And these prophecies, you can take them or leave them, believe them or not. It's just, whatever people think or say. Some of these things, the third master of the system, Chargi, has said were things that could be avoided at one time, but then there's a point of no return. And to my understanding, there's a point of no return. Like the nuclear war was supposed to happen, I think, in the 1970s or 80s. It was originally scheduled, and then it was pushed back for whatever reason. Like there's divine beings who monitor the earth, and for one reason or another, they can withhold something and prevent something that is inevitable, but just can be delayed. And, the so-called doomsday, the end of our civilization. But in the context of that, I'm going to read this to you. And I'm going to read Babaji's chapter by vision at some point. Hopefully I'll remember to do that here as well. I might come up with a part 2 of this, depending on how long it takes me to read all these messages. But there's a number of messages that were published that were called Prophecies in the first edition of Whispers of the Brighter World. And when this book came out, it was just magical. It was in a box, and it was leather bound, and it had all these like etheric pictures, and it was just this really wonderful book. And it started off with messages from Charji's mother, who she died when he was 5 years old, and was heart wrenching. And then his wife had just recently passed away, and so that was something where he was just receiving messages from his wife and his mom, and then all the stuff from Babaji and things like this. And so eventually Charji would die in 2014, and then he would give some messages, to the Abhyasis, which were really nice to receive. And you could hear his voice. Like I didn't know Babaji, but I read a lot of stuff from Babaji, and you can hear their voice when even though they're disembodied souls, their essence has a certain way of self-expression. And so again, these prophecies were given in a chapter called Prophecies. But there's other messages that are even as much or more prophetic. There's probably another 100 of them, and I'll read some of those as well, just to get a sense of it. But these are more than enough. They're kind of overwhelming. And there's one that I want to start with that speaks of something happening in 25 years, a quarter of a century. And so that's the reason I'm reading it now, because this is the beginning of 2026 or next year at the end of 2025, or sometimes it could be, next week. I don't know, because I think when Babaji says a quarter of a century here, and I'll talk about it when I'm reading it, that he means possibly, like just about, like not 25 years to the day, but around 25 years from now. So here it is. Okay, so again, I'll read these in order, but I want to start with this one. It's sort of, it's not in order in terms of the timeline. So this one, I got to make this bigger as well. So this is Wednesday, February 28th, 2001, 9 a.m. So it would be in a quarter of a century. Starts off in a quarter of a century, which would mean, 25 years to the day would be 2006, February 2006. But it could be something about 25 years. In a quarter of a century, the Earth will experience a major turbulence. That will be the beginning of a cycle which Earthmen will find very difficult to go through. Fire will literally beat down in certain parts of the world, whereas torrents of rain will pour over others. Cataclysms will follow one another for many long years, keeping men frightened. Many will turn toward a supreme God, beseeching his forgiveness. Forgiveness for more and more aberrant behaviors, as well as for the maltreatment imposed on their nourishing mother, the earth. The failure to respect the elements will lead to the effects generating terror among the population of the end of the century. In future ages, the present layout of the continents will be shattered, maps will need revising, yet the creatures inhabiting this planet will have more than enough to do in order to survive rather than dealing with those details. Atom, ATOM, will turn against mankind who will not have been able to harness it, and its lightning power will be devastating. The time for punishment for such a conceit will take place as hard as it can, and man, paying for his ancestors' glaring mistakes, will suffer without having any control over their situation. The transformation of this planet must go through all these cataclysms in order to be effectively completed. Babaji. And so I might add here, and I think this is important, distinction, that this isn't something bad that's happened or something that's, we experience it as being bad. But something has to end for something else to begin. If we, in the truth community, more than anybody else, acknowledge that what's going on now sucks and we're going in the wrong fucking direction. Almost everybody can see it. We're going in the wrong direction. And so if that's the case, then the end of something that's bad, like an addiction, our collective negative tendencies and our egotistical pursuits that are leading us away from the God within us, from our morality, from our ethics, from our heart, from our family, from nature, and we're doing damage and making the world a worse place, and we're going in the wrong direction, then this thing coming to an end would be a blessing, even though we won't perceive it as so because of the physical discomforts and the fear of death and things that we have, and all of it. But it is framed here as something, that work that was being done, and that Babaji was ordered to end this current situation, through these divine orders that he was receiving, and then set the parameters and the I don't want to say the catalysts or the conditions for human beings to connect to God and evolve spiritually, which is the ultimate goal here. And so these messages should be considered, as, well, this thing has to happen for something good has to happen, right? Something has to end for something better, for where something better begins, before something better begins. All right, let's go to the next one here. Okay, so let me pull this one up. Here it is. Okay, got to make this one bigger. This is Saturday, August 3rd, 2003. I'm not sure. I'm just going to read this in the order they're there. This isn't the order they necessarily were put in the book. We have already made enough predictions about this poor planet. So this is most of the messages were between 2001 and then this one in 2003. We have already made enough predictions about this poor planet. What it has been undergoing since a long time is unprecedented in its history. It's not the only one to undergo these sufferings, as humans live in symbiosis with it. As humans live in symbiosis with it, they necessarily suffer the related unpleasing repercussions without being able to actually identify them. Humanity is doing very badly, and this evil is growing. It often seems to lose its mind, and in the present state of affairs, we can only note this dangerous evolution. In spite of that, many souls are waking up and searching their way, a bit lost in front of the profusion of all that is offered to them. Many contradictory currents, different approaches to the issue, among which one has to make a choice and to adjust himself accordingly to his own aspirations. Sajmarg is one of the options. It is somewhat different from all that currently exists. This is how our aspirants feel about it. By practicing with perseverance, they necessarily get confirmation of the initial feeling. There are families of souls. They can be recognized within families which they belong to. When time has come for them to go to the main thing, the researcher is guided to this end. He then understands that the moment has come for him to engage in a new phase of his evolution. He has no more time to lose. Humanity is getting into a new era where everything is at stake for it. Will it be able to be convinced of it and to act accordingly? We are all working to this end. May the period of enlightenment be established here below, Babaji. Again, there is always the factor of human choice. And so when you're talking about an evolutionary situation, then there is, whether people are going to accept it or not. So this is sort of a follow-up to the message that I read about 25 years and a quarter of a century. But this one came first. This is Friday, December 29th, 2008 a.m. Nuclear power will ruin the world. This badly controlled power is demonic. One day, man will be overwhelmed by its power. Upheavals that will change the world will have their origin in it. It has much wider implications than you could imagine, and which contribute to destabilizing the balance of this planet. In this matter also, man plays with fire without actually being aware of the detrimental consequences for humanity. A natural energy will replace all that is currently used and which is harmful to man. Human knowledge does not allow its use for the time being. These secrets will be revealed to men of goodwill who will look forward in an inspired scientific research. That energy will be non polluting and not very expensive. Those with money power will not be content with it. Only the absolute necessity for the survival of the world will prevail. This time is not going to happen tomorrow. The earth will go through great changes before getting into that. These prophecies do not concern you. You are undergoing the damaging effects of this insidious pollution, which will lead the world to collapsing. But you can neither stop time nor modify the system in place. Then protect yourself as possible from these harmful effects, and pray for the brothers of the future. Babaji. So that last part is really important, where he says that would lead to the collapsing of the world, but you can neither stop time or modify the system in place, which is a good way of putting it, right? We can't prevent time from moving on, and we can't fix the system. And so we pray for our brothers and sisters of the future. Now, this idea that there'll be an energy, a cheap energy that will replace what we have now, it'll be non-polluting and it'll be, a better, obviously more efficient energy would be blocked by the powers that be because they can't own it and control it. So it means that there's going to be some civilization left after all these things happen. That there's going to be, some, this isn't going to be like we're going to the Dark Ages. Although for some people it'll be that because there won't, the civilization won't be a global civilization, and the structure of the earth is going to change. And in all this, the idea is that people connect to the divinity within them is the one solution. But will people choose that, right? Like, that's the big question. See, I was just talking about this in my New Year's Eve, year of video. The year of the chaos, which is, partially due to these messages, but we all see things are devolving into chaos, right? And I was talking about how, like I heard this on the news maybe yesterday, that the majority of people within a couple of months get rid of their the New Year's resolution. And their New Year's resolution is usually something they know they should be doing, but they're like, oh, I'll do a New Year's resolution. And then they call it quitting Friday or whatever it was. Like I talked about that. See if I still have I might have the tab open here. It's called Quitter's Day. And 23% of adults quit their New Year's goals by the end of the first week of January. And it's usually a Friday because they want to do something on Friday that they've been not wanting to, they'll smoke cigarettes or go out and drink or do whatever they're trying to get rid of, right? And they know they have to change it and they know it's good for them, but they don't see it through. People don't like to change. People like to see other people change. They like to complain about other people, but they don't want to change themselves, right? And so there's going to have to be drastic changes here for humans to survive what's coming. And they can go low or you can go high. You can embrace your ego or you can embrace your soul. And it's going to be one of the two things, and it's going to be significant, whatever it might be. And if people embrace their egos, then humanity will be wiped out, and the powers that be will try something else here. So this is going to be a turning point. It's going to be, a yes or no for humanity. It's going to be the ultimate test, sink or swim. Thrown in the middle of the ocean when you're a toddler, you either sink or you swim. And that's my understanding of all these things. And the majority of souls are going to be not a part of it. Like most human souls are not going to be a part of this because there's going to be drastic population reduction. And so if there's, 8 billion people and then that goes down to less than 1 billion, that means 7 out of 8 people won't be a part of this, right? And so there's a culling or a cutting of the The amount of people that are, there's you have to make it into the club just to live in this, this toxic, almost uninhabitable post-apocalyptic world so that you can work to build a better future for yourself and other people where spirituality will reign, where people's interconnection with God will be the major factor guiding them through their earthly decisions. And all civilizations, all of the the systems that are used will be built with this idea in mind, with a connection to the divinity within you and working with God and God's, working for God and embracing God's, laws and principles and spiritual truths that are so prevalently ignored at this, particular time in history. Okay, so I'm gonna take a break here and I'll come back and start reading some more. Okay, just went on a walk with my wife. We ate lunch and it's pouring outside. We have a pond in our pasture, which we had dug. And the guy was supposed to put a lot of clay up on the sides of it, but he didn't do such a good job. But it's worked out because there's a part of the pond that always has water. And where we live, the area is basically a swamp. There's all these places that were built on swamps. Where I grew up in Connecticut, like the whole state, a big portion of it's a swamp, right? The lowlands. And when you pour topsoil in, the place still wants to be a swamp. Like there's natural water flow there. And our pasture is very much a swamp. Our house is, up probably about 10 feet above the pasture area. But the pasture has flooding areas, and the pond was one of those places that flooded every year. Sometimes the whole thing's underwater, but now all that water runs down to the pond, and if the pond is, half empty, then it's, now it's back to being almost completely full, and then there's like an extra full where it expands to its maximum capacity, which is kind of interesting. Rain is very auspicious in the Sajamarg meditation. When there's a gathering, it represents divine grace, so I feel very optimistic about this year. And so the one thing I want to say here is that when you look at discourse, public discourse, that's where I was going to say it initially, accidentally. There is a general feeling of impending doom. Kids growing up, there's such this attitude that we're entering the apocalypse. I've never seen this before, where the majority of people felt this way, right? There's some people who have, people have unrealistic hopes, right? Joe Biden, the hope of Joe Biden fixing the Trump stuff and Trump fixing the Democrat stuff, right? All these things. These unrealistic hopes that, one side could get into power, truthers could, do something, or, America might wake up and we'll change what we're going, change the course of action. But most people believe we're on a course to disaster. But the disaster has already happened over a series of generations. Over a long period of time, based on our faulty economic system, our religions being completely the opposite of what they're supposed to do, which is block your connect. What they do is block your connection to God instead of facilitating that connection. And then the family and morality have dissolved because of these things, right? And so we've gone in the wrong direction. And so most people kind of get it. We're going in the wrong direction. And that the system is corrupt. And there doesn't seem much hope, I think, for most people that it could be fixed, right? Going back to that last Whispers of the Brighter World message. But the idea of it collapsing completely is terrifying because we don't know any other way. We don't have a backup plan. We don't have skills. We're a lot weaker and unnatural than we should be. And most of us couldn't withstand that kind of massive change in lifestyle. When people can't even sustain a New Year's resolution for more than a week, right? So, that's where we are as a species. But I think deep down, most people know that the system is bad and it's making us worse and we're going in the wrong direction and it probably needs to be stopped, even though we don't want to, we don't want to experience what that means. But when you look at it that way, then these messages aren't so horrible or anything like that, right? But let's go to the next one here. And so this is a good one because of the way it starts off. So this is Friday, December 29th, 2000, 10 a.m. The city of the Atlantis civilization was very advanced, much more than yours. When it was engulfed Vast expanses of land were dislocated to become continents as you currently know them. This planet underwent very many upheavals before getting into its current configuration. Some more upheavals will take place. It is inevitable. This is part of the Great Movement, which governs the structure of the universe, in addition to which, as far as the Earth is concerned, there is incredible contempt with which men, having a destructive instinct, treat elements that make it up. They are not unaware of the serious dangers in which they put humanity, but they continue to move forward in the race for power, primarily their own power subordinated to money power. Others devote their intelligence and action to their brothers, and thus the balance of values tentatively takes place. We let you think about that issue in this end of year, when the prospects for peace in certain parts of the world don't look exactly cheerful. As for you, cultivate in your hearts this powerful strength that is love to counterbalance the forces of evil. Babaji. Some of these whispers messages allude to the fact that there's different levels of this experience, right? Of any experience. There could be the worst version, the most unpleasant, and then it could be easier. Just based in, if you're willing to make the change internally, like if you're going to go through something that's supposed to humble you, if you can humble yourself without going through something difficult, right? One time my brother was helping me start a landscaping business. And I had my friend, his dad was a builder, and the guy had all these cool tools and all this equipment. And I have these pieces of metal I needed him to bend. And then he drilled holes in them. It was very helpful. Went over his house. And, then I put these metal things on the end of these, big 2x12 boards. And I would take a lawnmower on and off the bed of the pickup truck I had, right? And so it was this old Ford pickup truck with 3 on the tree, right? Just the old style. It had this. It was a standard. It had three gears on the tree of the on the steering wheel, the column, and I would take the the lawnmower on and off the truck that way. And one time I was going to put it up on the truck, and my brother said, "Look, I was debating whether I should tell you this or not, but you see, you don't have the boards pushed all the way in." And he said, "Because if I didn't tell you and the lawnmower fell off or whatever, you would never forget. You would never make that mistake again." But him telling me that was enough for me never to make that mistake again. Because, as much as I'd be in a rush to, sometimes I was cutting 10, 15 lawns in a day, I always took my time to make sure the boards were set and that I could safely get them on and off the truck. Because it could have been a disaster. It could be something where I would be maimed for life. The lawnmower is a heavy lock lawnmower, these old-fashioned. So, it was just heavy, and it would have been a nightmare if the boards broke or it fell off or slipped on top of me or something. So, but I never forgot that lesson, right? Because I, said, well, that could have been a disaster, and I didn't need to experience it once. I just needed to see that could have happened, right? And so, this is what can happen if you are open to change and you are subtle and you're listening to God's warnings, and you can adjust yourself without going through some calamity to invoke the change that's going to happen. But it seems like humanity, as Babaji said, is going to take place as hard as it can, because it's just going to be some kind of really brutal experience for humanity to wake up, fuck up to what we're doing wrong and to go in a different direction. So let's go to the next one. Sunday, February 25th, 2001, 6 p.m. So this is before the 25 years one. He refers to the medium as my daughter. My dear daughter, we would like now to start giving you messages having a totally different content. Scientists are very often mistaken in their assertions. In a century, these assertions will be outdated. Man will have taken a step forward in his understanding of the laws governing the universe. They will then become obvious to a great number of minds capable of understanding their real meaning. Significant changes will take place on the earth, globe, after great upheavals have occurred. Even the best established structures will be disrupted, and the elements will make life difficult for human beings, who will have to face up to things. Another race, stronger and having a much more developed sense of extrasensory perception, will set up a world that would astonish most men living in the present. When the poles are reversed, they will generate great climactic changes. Men will need to adjust themselves. A large part of the population in its present proportions will have disappeared. The earth will start a new era best suited to its evolution. We will further elaborate to some of the mentioned topics, and you'll have to note down without wondering too much, even though you cannot verify the soundness of what you are writing. These predictions should neither worry nor embarrass you. They do not relate to your present day, and a long time will have passed before all our assertions come true. You will need to trust in us and leave the usual doubts aside. These writings will long remain in oblivion before they could be made public. Therefore, it suits you to consider them as fiction. We have no objection to that. Don't worry, you are not under the influence of any devious spirit. We will resume the normal course of talks. Be at peace. Be blessed. Babaji. Okay, so the median wasn't digging these prophecies. This was one of the first ones. And, she oftentimes she had her doubts and she had her issues with all of these things, but didn't understand a lot of the stuff that was going on. She wasn't, up to date on current events, and she wasn't a truther or a conspiracy theorist or whatever you want to call it. So these messages freaked her out, basically. And so, and then Wednesday, February 28th, 2001, 10 a.m., you can call this new collection Prophecies, Babaji. So this was after the one that said in a quarter of a century. And so that was related to that message. And so here is one. Let's make this bigger. Sunday, March 4th, 2001, 8 a.m. The Earth's history is both very ancient and rich. It had some advanced civilization. Extraterrestrials, as you call them, came to establish exploration sites and to build interplanetary relay stations. Some of them survived, even though not having their primary usefulness anymore. The pyramids belong to them. Many things are said and written about them. They still play an important role energy-wise. Revelations on this point will bring a new enlightenment to men of future ages. That time has not yet come. Could they really understand all the subtleties of this system? They should at least start admitting that life exists on planets of the solar system and beyond. It will be necessary. It will really be necessary to hit hard so they accept this principle. A massive invasion will occur. We have already mentioned that possibility, which alone will put an end to the wanderings of all forms of science. The whole picture will need revising. Those beings will bring an extraordinary knowledge that will leave the poor earthlies stupefied with their pompous ideas on everything, most of which are wrong or worthless. These buildings would come in order to protect the universal balance from man's misconduct, as well as from the huge risks they're running with their so-called progress, which is alarming in many respects. Babaji. I don't think that this is going to happen soon. I think there's going to be a nuclear war, which he alluded to earlier, and some other things will happen, and so that's whatever it is. Sunday, March 4th, 2001, 10 a.m. So this was all, in 2001, in not consecutive days, but these kind of things, right? Where it was, in a cluster of messages. My dear daughter, concerning these prophecies, you must write what we dictate without having any qualms. You cannot check the soundness of what we are telling you. Some of our comments confirm assertions you've read from other sources, which themselves include some of ours, the best inspired ones being written by mediums having access to well-informed sources. Great upheavals occurred on this planet time and time again. They made life evolve in various forms. Terrifying species inhabited this planet that screenwriters of science fiction movies cannot even imagine. The humanoid kingdom is rather recent. It was not about spontaneous generation, but it was experimentally generated by superior beings and has evolved with time. Present research Present researchers whose eyes are reverted to test tubes would be astounded if they discovered the true reality of mankind. There's no question here of an upper race, as they believe. This subrace tries to work its way up to the upper level with God's help. There is every hope of success. There's a lot to do. All kinds of committed persons have devoted themselves to it. Eden will not happen in a hurry, but a high level embryonic consciousness is germinating and growing in this world so as to reach a possible full blossoming in a very distant future, Babaji. And so this is why I've talked about the genetic mutation in test tube babies. Of course, this is supported by various people out there and theories and the fusing of the second and third chromosomes and the stuff I talked about with Lloyd Pye, and I've talked about these things in other videos, right? But this idea of a subrace, I've talked about how there was a time that people on Earth lived thousands of years. Like, so the Mahabharata at that time, 5,000 years ago, these guys were living hundreds, if not thousands of years. Babaji talked about some people who lived like yugas. They lived 10,000-year yugas, right? I might have had a past life where there was this kind of, I was a Asura king, a bad king, where I lived hundreds of thousands of years. Like this, if I was that person in terms of the, definition. So, there is these types of things out there, right? Where we don't have access to it. But I do know that I realized at some point, and it just makes sense if when you're become an adult, you complete your education, which is, that's like you're done learning. That's kind of the American model. And you start your career, and shortly thereafter you get married, or, you might start your career and get married at the same time. And then you start having kids almost immediately. So you get your career going, and oftentimes both people are working. Then also you get married, which is you're learning and spending time and having, a life partner. And then you have kids, and each one of these things is a major thing that could dominate your whole existence, right? Each one of these things could just be enough to just deal with at once, right? And then, this is the time where you should really begin your spiritual practice. And as an adult, you can start cultivating a relationship with God. But where's the time and energy to go into that? So you have these four major aspects to your life: career, your life's work, your marital relationship, your raising kids, and then your relationship to God. And then, and then if you want to pursue more knowledge, right, gathering more knowledge, and then, whatever else you're doing. Let's say that starts in your 20s, like you turn 22, that's, 24, let's say. And then by the time you're 44, I mean, you're more than, for most people, halfway done with your life. When you turn 38, you're halfway point of your life, right? And then as you're in your 40s, you start developing physical issues. I mean, health issues, which, for younger people, it's happening even sooner. And then you're dealing with chronic health issues as well. Your kids are, depending on how many kids you have, you should be entering your last phase of your job in terms of retirement, but that won't happen for another 20 years. You still really haven't engaged in a spiritual practice, and your life's energy is diminished. You don't have much energy, and you have all these things, all these stressors that still aren't completely resolved, right? And then before you know it, you're old, and like I just said in a recent video, I finally have cracked the code of my life. And I have all these, as you grow older, you have these programs, usually from past lives, if you've had past lives. And knowledge kicks in as you become a parent, as you do a career, as you enter into various phases of your life, things that you knew but you didn't know you knew, and abilities that you had and that you didn't know you had start kicking in. And by the time, you just have all yourself, like you've incorporated all these different traits that you had available to you, but it took physical life experience to pull them out of you, right? By the time that happens, you're in the death process. But imagine if by the time you were 60, that was like you're a teenager. And imagine if you could spend your whole, 60 years as a young person, or whatever it is, 100 years as a young person, where you traveled and you had adventures and you learned about life and you developed skills and you became a complete person. You earned whatever amount of money that would last you the rest of your life. so you didn't have to deal with those kind of things, right? And you established yourself, and then you got married, and then you had kids, like you married, for 10, 15 years, you had kids, whatever it was. And then you could devote the rest of your time to spiritual life and, pursuits and hobbies and things that you were interested in, and, which would be maybe hundreds of years, right? And so you could accomplish so much more in so many different ways. But when it's all crammed together, it's because we were programmed, or we were genetically manipulated to be slaves, and short lifespan. If you ever seen the first Blade Runner movie, the clones only lived for 4 years because they were superior physically, and they would overtake humanity. They were made stronger and things like this. My wife just called me. She'll listen to my New Year's video where the New Year's Eve video where I'm saying the year of, this is the year of chaos, right? 2025. And I started the video. What happened was I pulled up all these links. I pulled up all my other videos that I had done year of. And I was going to take little clips of them and make them into the visual portion of the video. Like you see that there's a picture of a sunset, I think, in what you're watching now. Sometimes I just have one image, but I was going to have these videos going. And as I did it, I heard all my voices, my voice in each video. And it was kind of interesting the way it was playing out. And, it would create almost a chaos in that sense. And like, well, this would be a good way to start the video. And so my wife she just called me and said that she was listening to the beginning part. And I kept on going, boop, and she was cracking up. So there was that. But getting back into it here, that if you're going to make a slave population, you would have to do things to keep them weakened so they wouldn't rebel, especially, in this slave population, which I talked about in my book, The Choice. It's likely that they made some people warriors, which they would increase their fight or flight and their aggressiveness, right? If they had people that were in charge of, whatever, security or something, like if you were extraterrestrials and you had these different levels of workers, you would make different groups of people based in the need of those people, right? Which would explain maybe the different racial groups or whatever it is, right? And so my understanding is that they created these, like a group of slaves, and they didn't do a great job genetically. They kind of slapped it together to harvest resources and things on this planet. And then they left, and left us with this mess, people who were, genetically manipulated, so we didn't come from an organic, natural process. We had access to higher levels of technology that we weren't mature enough to navigate, and we had this short lifespans, and some people that were, had these tendencies towards aggression, and so that's why we have this mess here, right? And so there is a chance for us to evolve to a higher level. We still have this, what they call junk DNA, which I talked about in various videos, to evolve to this higher level, and yet, we're predisposed to the lower. And so, like there's all of those things, right? Now let me pull up the next one. And so that's what the reference is to all those other, prophecies, are the one I just read. And so this one, Tuesday, March 6, 2001. My dear daughter, let us focus on what is feasible. The current system is working rather well, except for a few delays due to the congestion of the telephone lines. He's talking about the system of translating these messages. We must appreciate the easiness the easiest we have arrived at. The working team is efficient if we can consider the present capabilities of this information technological. Why couldn't we also have our own means of communication? In centuries to come, skepticism on this point will not exist anymore, as the means will be widely used on Earth. He means this type of a channeling. Mankind will make great progress in knowledge and in the perception of vibratory waves surrounding this planet. It will be less populated than it is now. Another race of individuals will live in these places, beings more advanced and receptive to the reality of the beyond. So this was in 2001, March. So this would be the next century. This planet will be used as a relay station among the sidereal and planetary systems. A leading edge technology not destructive for mankind will facilitate that service. Telepathy and the many resources of the brain will become very much used for everyone's good. That is something reassuring, which raises hopes for the descendants of today's man who are moving forward in this world of darkness and despair. Babaji. And so, like 100 years seems to be when a lot of these things have all played out, and then good things will be coming in. So there's going to be 100 years, and it's going to be like 80 years, right? If some event happens in the next year, and then you have 75 years, a lifetime, which isn't so long, and then other things will be happening during this time, and then eventually everything will settle down, and there'll be an evolved human race. Hopefully, this will happen. That humanity will choose this, and all these things. Friday, March 9th, 2001, 8 a.m. The current communication technologically is still in its infancy. Let's make this bigger here. The current communication technologically is still in its infancy. It has a long way to go to reach the most efficient stage of being an interplanetary relay station. It must improve its subtlety and put no more restrictive barriers on the grounds that only the Earth would be inhabited, as we have already said. Its level of evolution is at an early stage. Men have high opinions of themselves. Scientists believe that they are the only ones to possess the truth, whereas they still are at the level of kindergarten, no more, no less. The planets that they assume not to be inhabited have forms of life far different from their own, and the few lights from which they benefit came from a beyond they cannot even imagine. And so what he's saying is that these etheric beings that occupy planets in our solar system that are, another form of life are being affected by human beings and are technological and, are going into space and doing these things. And some of these higher developed souls are coming, that come into this planet to elevate humanity, saints and spiritual masters. So let's read that again. Men have a high opinion of themselves. Scientists believe that they are the only ones to possess the truth, whereas they are still at a level of kindergarten, no more, no less. The planets that they assume not to be inhabited have forms of life far different from their own, and the few lights from which they benefit come from a beyond that they cannot even imagine. Will it finally be necessary for a large number of those beings to come to Earth during trying and hopeless times for the inhabitants and get them out of the tragic situation, so that in the end they become aware of their limitations? They will then have to align themselves with advanced knowledge and to reconsider all the thoughts they have acquired. They will reconsider all the thoughts that they have acquired. They'll have to start all over again on sound basis, enlightened by the highly developed race, which, in spite of that, won't easily impose their views. Despite of that, won't easily impose their views. That they're not going to force the lower level of people to obey them. They're going to try to win them over. Absolute necessity will have the force of law. Men, for their survival, will have to abide by it. Babaji. Okay, 3 more messages to go. I took a little break here, and then I'm going to wrap this up. I thought I was going to read more of them, and I'm going to do a part 2. And I'm going to find, more of these ones that should be a part of this, this whole group. There's quite a bit of them, and there's probably some we didn't even see. But it's just too much to do. I mean, it's a lot to absorb, just these amount. Like each one could be taken independently and thought about, and, what are the implications and what does it mean? But like I said, I'll look into doing a second, maybe even a third this year. Like maybe in a month or so, I'll do another one. And if I forget, people can remind me. People who want to hear more of these and whatever it is. Saturday, March 10th, 2001, 4 p.m. These prophecies are to be taken as they stand, hope for the future. A stronger race, more advanced and respectful of true values, will arise. That is how the future will be shaped. Those beings will evolve differently, and their objective won't be money anymore. That is enough to make some of you dream. Those who did not believe that this kind of prospect could happen, man of future ages will not resemble today's man, neither body-wise nor mind-wise. That race, the result of important mutation, will start its path between two worlds, a long way at the service of the great beings who reign over the solar system, orchestrating the planet's movement and the harmony that must exist in the cosmos. The supreme strength of this vibration governs the worlds. The last deficiency brings about chain reactions. Infinity, coming back to it, not a shapeless and lifeless mass without reference point. It is beyond your reach and comprehension. It is actually infinite insofar as it is not measurable. That is a truth. That is a truth that doesn't align you and you at your current stage, doesn't enlighten you at your current stage, but which in the future might reasonably be clearer. Babaji. So that's interesting, right? So he talks about this mutation that's going to take place, that human beings will evolve. Like this is a butterfly type situation where we have to be more advanced than we are now. And whatever is going to happen to make that take place, I don't know what physical things are going to happen, what internal things are going to happen, but there'll be human beings with different tendencies that mentally and physically will be structured in a different way. It's like the Cro-Magnon man coming to replace the Neanderthal, right? Or was it the opposite? I don't know. Whatever it was. That's bullshit anyhow. So, but you get the idea, right? It's like we're becoming the butterfly. We're evolving from the caterpillar. And so this is, a part of it. And that, I think just thinking about it that way makes these much more acceptable. So let's move on here. Sunday, March 11, 2001, 8 a.m. You must not be afraid of writing what we dictate to you. A world new and totally different from what you are presented living in will exist in future centuries. Establish a parallel between what life was in the 19th century and what it is nowadays. Would the most advanced people of those days have imagined what exists now in every field? You consider everything as normal and take it definitely for granted. Similarly, the way to go within the next 2 centuries will be even more amazing. The way to go within the next 2 centuries will be even more amazing. Therefore, you must note down without absolutely any reservation, even if you do not understand. A new world is in the offing. You cannot imagine it. It is beyond your comprehension. Your current civilization is built on a few principles that will no longer prevail in the future. Electricity, oil, and all its byproducts, which are used in the present system, will be considered as antiques and simply forgotten. A complete revolution will have occurred at every level. If a vestige of your civilization had to remain, it might be studied with curiosity. That is the way it is since the beginning of time. Everything evolves and is renewed. Men end up going to the most glaring extremes. That must therefore be remedied. Everything changes and is transformed. It is the nature of things. Babaji. So again, these are self-explanatory here. If there was some higher version of yourself that wanted to take your place, right? Like this, we watched this show on Apple TV, and this guy invented some kind of form of interdimensional travel. And at the end of the TV show, it wasn't a great TV show, but there were versions of himself, right, that were all competing to be him, right? Like he was all to be a part of who he was in this world. And there was hundreds of them killing each other, right? They were all versions of himself. and they were all wanting to take over his life. There was one guy who it was his real timeline, and all the other ones were basically imposters, but they were all vying to, live with his wife and these things, right? Kind of interesting, premise. The show itself kind of sucked. But, people have their own selfish. I mean, they were killing each other. They were killing themselves, like they were murdering each other throughout, plotting against each other. I mean, it was, in that sense, it was interesting, right? Even though they were all the same and they were, they were identical. And so people don't want to be replaced by a superior version of themselves, humanity in general. And so that's the sticking point, right? But when we incarnate into a higher level being, those of us who are lucky to come back because the population will be reduced, well, that'll be something great because they'll, a lot of the things that we're struggling with now won't be there. The limitations we have and the things we complain about. So here's the last one. Sunday, March 11th, 2001, 10 a.m. So these were all in a row. These were all in 2001, these last ones. Why keep dwelling on the opinion of other people? Aren't you satisfied with ours? You are a good medium, and that is not easy as your circle may and not as easily as your circle may think. You put a lot of yourself into this work, and it's natural that you express yourself when you so wish. This new collection will puzzle you many times. You will have to get used to it, this new genre whose contents are unverifiable, and adapt yourself at all costs. We give you some time. We give you some time. Your helpers will support you in this new phase full of surprises. You finally resign yourself to not doubting anymore, and yet we start again shaking you up. We have to progress in our work, and you need to trust in us. That is all we can tell you about this. Do not be afraid. You receive us very well. The comments are different, but you are not the cause of it. We couldn't we couldn't eternally go along the same lines. Keep these writings for yourself if you wish. It's up to you, but it is good to prepare open-minded people for this potential complete upheaval in future times. Some ancient civilizations have gone through similar events before they disappeared. They take place over very long periods of time and do not concern you, Babaji. And so, she struggled and had issues with all of these things. But, all this stuff is kind of, like I said, it's all there, and it's things I've talked about personally. There's other references and people who have similar ideas about the future of humanity. This thing that Babaji did, which I think I'll read his I don't want to do that today, the reality at dawn, my vision, because I'm just kind of burnt. It's like a lot to do, and I completed another video this morning. But someday I'll do a follow-up to this. I'll read Babaji's Reality at Dawn, and I'll continue with part 2 here. There's so many more messages. Let me look at the folder. So I have those messages, and then I have one that says more, and there's probably 30 messages, and then there's some new ones, right? And so, I'll I'll look through those and see which ones are worth reading. Some of them are a little bit redundant, but you get the idea. But essentially, it's this one that I want to focus on, the first one, that was given on, I believe, the 25th or 28th of February in 2001, and says in a quarter of a century, which is now upon us, right? And so it just feels like big things are afoot, and we'll see what happens in this next year and following year, and if there's major changes, and we can see that this process is kicking in. If it is, then it's this idea of focusing on evolving spiritually and all the rest of the things I talk about here, and what Babaji talks about in these messages, will be essential. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano definitely pointing for the apocalypse. And the ascension, everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.